Well, you see, while all his peers developed their quirks.
A simple phrase to most, but for young Izuku these words carry much more weight than what others think. You see, Izuku is not like most of his classmates nor like most in the society he lived in. Why, you may ask? Well, you see, while all his peers developed their quirks, the young boy was the only who has yet to develop a quirk of his own for quite some time now, despite his age being the point where most quirks would manifest. Unfortunately, this also led to a heated argument between his mother and father, which resulted in his father leaving them behind. A topic that his mother would never want to discuss, and quite frankly, neither did her son. And yet, despite the possible discrimination and treatment he will receive, he does not plan on giving in. While knowing full well that being a hero would be difficult without having a quirk, he still firmly believed that he can make a difference in this world despite what others may think. He would always help those in need. Which brings us to our current situation. A scared but determined 4-year-old Izuku standing in front of an injured boy to protect him from a group of bullies. I get that you have a powerful quirk, but that doesn't give you the right to be mean to others, Kaken. He said with a determined face, however he showed traces of fear in his body language. Who do you think you are, telling me what to do, huh? Said the blonde-haired who began grinning evilly. Last I checked, a quirkless nobody like you couldn't even stand a chance against me, he said as he smacked his fist into his other, creating a small firework sound. He and his 2 other cronies began laughing maliciously as the young Izuku and boy showed clear signs of fear as they approached. Izuku could only stare in disbelief as his former friend turned bully. While granted, Katsuki Bakugo was never known as a very nice kid. However, he never went out of his way to actually inflict harm and belittle others before his quirk manifested. After that happened a few months ago, he changed for the worst and eventually began bullying everyone with what he deemed a weaker quirk. And although Izuku had no quirk to defend himself against a very powerful quirk, he was not about to stand there and do nothing, while Katsuki used his gift to hurt others. Izuku never liked the idea of innocents being hurt, while he can at least do something about it. As far as he was concerned, quirks should be used to help people, and should never be used to prey on the weak. Logically, he doesn't stand a chance against Bakugo's firepower. However, his heart and determination prevented him from running away and leaving the injured boy behind. Standing his ground, though a bit shaky, he stared at the 3 bullies who were still making their way towards them. He steeled himself to say something but was interrupted by one of the cronies. What chance do you have against us? You're basically worthless, stated one of the cronies as he began chuckling at the situation. Actually, he's quirkless, but then again, there isn't much of a difference there, right? The crony on the left cackled to himself, but was soon joined by Katsuki and the other crony. Izuku grit his teeth as he shakily stood his ground. It's true that I have no quirk, he said, looking down for a bit, but then stared at them determinedly and said, but I won't just stand there and let someone get hurt. You 3 have quirks, there's no denying that, but if you use your powers to hurt others, then you don't deserve them. This statement, though brave, resulted in the 3 boys glaring at Izuku, and would undoubtedly hurt him more because of his outburst. Izuku realized all of this, and as a final gesture he turned towards the downed boy with shaky smile and said, they'll be focused on me, so you better leave while you still can. The young boy looked like he wanted to protest for a split second, but quickly changed his mind and gave a shaky nod as he stood and began making his out of the area, leaving Izuku to his fate. Turning around, he saw the 3 began charging towards him. Knowing that he saved the boy in the end left him with no regrets as he was about to receive a severe pummeling from the angered bullies. In the end, the safety of others mattered more than his own. Izuku was brought out of his thoughts as he began bracing himself for the onslaught. After the beatdown, Izuku woke up facing the sky. It was clear that during the beatdown he passed out, probably from the amount of pain he received. He didn't need to look at his body to know that it's probably covered with scrapes and bruises. He can even taste a hint of metal, signaling that he must have bled from his mouth as well. He wasn't sure when he passed out, but he was somewhat glad that he didn't have to remember every detail of the experience. Noticing that the sun is setting, with painful grunt he sat up and began steady himself despite the clear signs of pain that his body is showing. Once sure that he can walk, he began limping his way towards his home despite his own body screaming for him to stop moving. As he made his way home, he began thinking of possible excuses to tell his mother why he was in pretty bad shape. He hated lying, but like many things there are reasons as to why he wanted to avoid telling his mother the truth. For one, he didn't want her to have a panic attack. She's already been through enough heartbreak as it is. On the day that he was examined as quirkless, he can still vividly remember his mother's face as the doctor delivered the examination. It was face of pure heartbreak. It's as if her entire world was falling apart around her. No doubt dreading the thought of her son facing the inevitable discrimination and be preyed upon by other people with quirks. The thought of her baby boy getting hurt while he couldn't do anything was too much for her, but she needed to keep it together until they made it home. For young Izuku, being told he was quirkless did indeed hurt, but seeing his mother being sad hurt him more than that. He thought that was the worst of it. Boy, was he wrong. Her cries of anguish echoed throughout their apartment. It was clear that she was trying to put on a brave face for him at the doctor's office. Now though, when she must have thought he fell asleep and allowed those walls to break down and finally allowed herself to sob openly. From then on, Izuku made an honest effort to try and relieve his mother's sadness, or at least try and not make it worse. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard a car honking. Turning his left to the source, his eyes widened at what he saw. Crossing the street was a small kitten, and heading towards it was a speeding truck showing no signs of stopping. Izuku's mind raced, trying and failing to find a way to rescue the kitten. Every scenario in his mind resulted in the kitten or both of them killed. The truck was getting closer now, and Izuku began losing his composure and instinctively tried to reach out for the kitten. He began closing his eyes, not wanting to see the poor creature get killed. He waited for the impact to be heard. He waited, but then nothing happened. His curiosity eventually overpowered him, and he dared to open his eyes, only for them to quickly widen at what he saw. The kitten was completely fine, but that wasn't the only thing. The kitten was surrounded by a green glow as it was floating right in front of him. That caused his eyes to water, realizing that this could only mean one thing. He had a quirk. And it was similar to his mother's, only noticeably stronger and easier to control. He was brought out of his usual muttering by an adorable mule. Looking up with tear-stained eyes, he saw the cat looking at him with a curious expression. He couldn't help but smile and start rubbing the kitten's head. The kitten leaned into his touch, purring as it did this. Izuku began gently placing the kitten back on the ground, and then sat against a nearby wall. As he processed the situation, only one thing stood out. The path to be a hero seemed a bit easier now with his newfound power. Quickly recomposing himself, he stood up, the pain of his body long since forgotten. He then made his way towards his home, eager to tell his mother the good news. Unbeknownst to him, the kitten began following him as well. Near the Midoriya residence. As Izuku was nearing his home, he began to notice something painfully obvious. He turned his to confirm his suspicions and immediately saw the kitten following him. The latter stopping to look at him in curiosity. He then stopped and crouched to look at the kitten. From what he remembered while the kitten was floating from his ability, he can confirm that the kitten was female. Upon further examination, the kitten had snow-white fur and blue eyes. It looked up to Izuku as if asking him to come along. To test this out, Izuku extended a palm towards the kitten. Not a second has passed, and the kitten immediately began licking Izuku's palms, eliciting a small giggle from the green-haired boy. It was clear that Izuku gained the complete trust of this kitten. If he abandoned her now, it would mean subjecting her to a world of loneliness and pain. With that in mind, his hero instincts kicked in, and it was clear on what must be done. Ever so gently, he brought the kitten into his arms with no resistance from the latter. "I think I'll name you Temmie, or Tem for short," he stated with a warm smile. The response he received was a cute mew from the little snowball. Giggling to himself, understanding that she loved the name, he made his way back to his home, where his mother must be feeling anxious and awaiting an explanation for his delay. At the doctor's office. Needless to say, just like his mother, the doctor was left speechless at this sudden development. Clearing his throat, gaining everyone's attention, he read the results of his examination. "It seems you are in good health, Izuku," making both Midoriya sigh in relief. "But," the doctor said, gaining everyone's attention, "his quirk appears to be more than what it seems." What followed next was a detailed explanation of what the doctor found out about Izuku's quirk so far. After the explanation, both Midoriyas had their eyes wide, and the jaws slightly agape, at the potential that Izuku had. Both were thrilled at the things he could do. The mother couldn't contain herself and promptly started lifting the boy up and hugging him, both having tears in their eyes. Midoriya residence later. The moment he entered his home, Izuku made his way to his room, but not before showing Temi some affection. In his room, he began studying his quirk as well as looking up ways to further train his abilities. Needless to say, being an individual who lives and breathes everything about being a hero, he acquired some fascinating results. It also helps that he's pretty much a nerd. After a few hours, Izuku ran to his mother and gave her a hug and immediately asked her tips on how she controls her quirk. Without a second thought, the mother happily gave him all the details the best she could, as well as giving tips when needed. In the meantime, Temi laid on Izuku's lap enjoying her nap. School day. Izuku stared out the window as his school was pretty much over now. The past few years have been the most interesting Izuku had. During his spare time, he would train his quirk and see what else he could do with it. The result was a versatile quirk that allowed him to surprise and even overpower enemies if given the right opportunity. Not only that, it had its uses in rescue missions as well. But if there was one word that Izuku could use to describe his quirk, it would be weird. Just by reminding himself the details of his abilities still baffled Izuku, despite him being the wielder of such power. Quirk, energized bones. Passive, subject has a sensory field around him, allowing him to sense the presence of individuals both living and non-living. This allows the subject to dodge with relative ease while at the same time being aware of his surroundings. With more training, it's theorized that the sensory field will grow even larger. Description: this quirk allows Izuku to literally energize his bones. Not only does it make his bones denser, but it also increases his strength, speed and reaction time. Even without weapons, subject still has immense strength, although overloading limbs cause some self-damage. Other abilities. Psychokinesis. Though similar to his mother's this ability, it is notably easier to control with needing almost no effort to activate. Depending on the weight, the subject can lift the item of focus of the ground. Though the more weight or resistance it offered, the more power will be needed to move the object, let alone lift it. Side note, still need to confirm if I can even make myself fly. Glowing eyes. As labeled, the subject's eyes begin to glow. The intensity depends on power output the subject is using. Notably useful if needed to intimidate opponents. Bone-based weaponry. Subject appears to use weapons with the main material being made of bones. Weapons can vary from clubs, swords with a pointed tip but a blunt handle, polearms and shields. Bones may sprout from the ground to act as a barrier to protect civilians and heroes alike. Bone materialization. As mentioned, the subject can sprout bones from almost any surface. It is notably difficult if the materials around would be metal, limiting the speed of which the bones form from the ground. But this is not the end of it. Subject appears to form his weapons from thin air as well. This allows him to create his melee weapons quickly, as well as his medium-ranged weapons. Gaster blasters. With the skeletal form of a wolf's head, honestly, it's pretty hard for me to describe the blasters, and glowing green eyes just like its wielder. These blasters can vary in size, making it useful in certain situations. The blasters can float around and be aimed at will. The range of these weapons is generally short to medium range. The projectile of these weapons is an energy beam that can vary in intensity. It's also noted that overuse can result in quick stamina drain. Secret ability shortcut. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, his quirk has one more surprise up its sleeve. For some reason, subject has the ability to teleport. Its use depends on subject's stamina and energy, allowing him to use it in quick bursts as to not quickly tire him out. Longer distances need more energy and a bit more concentration. Combined with his sensory field, he can locate areas where no one can notice him appear or disappear. Izuku had long since concluded that his quirk is definitely one of a kind, and would gladly use it to help those around him. And though powerful, he would always stay humble, and to keep in mind that he is by no means invincible. Through these past few years, Izuku decided not reveal to anyone that he manifested a quirk yet, leaving his mother, Temi, and the doctor the only ones to know. Admittedly, a part of him was tempted to show his quirk, but he quickly decided against it. If he were to show off his quirk, then he would be no better than the people that showed off their powers just to prove how better they are than everyone else. This led to him being bullied under the guise that he was a quirkless individual who they can easily pick on. During those years, Izuku would subtly use his power to allow him to escape unwanted attention. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard an all too familiar explosion. Bakugo smirked as stood up, creating small explosions on his hands. Hey! Don't lump me with these extras. Needless, the entire class were outraged towards the explosive quirk user for the obvious insult towards them. Izuku could only sigh mentally as once again Bakugo couldn't resist showing off how he was the best and how everyone's quirks were useless. The uproar was silenced when the teacher noticed a form on his desk. Well, it appears you're not the only one going to UA, stated in a slightly amused tone. This of course made all eyes turn to him, including a very enraged Bakugo. The reactions afterwards are what you'd expect. People laughed and even gave him disapproving looks. And Bakugo looked like he was about to send the entire place crumbling around them. But the commotion died down when they noticed the timid boy didn't even make a reaction. Rather, it looked like he was waiting for them to finish. Which he totally was, once the commotion died down. Midoriya calmly said, "I know it sounds crazy, and even impossible to most." He looked down for a bit, and then looked at everyone in the eye with a determined expression that surprised them a bit. He then continued, "But no matter what I've been through or how people view me, my goal doesn't change. I want to be a hero that helps people, and I'm willing to give it everything I've got." At the end of his speech, everyone was left speechless, not expecting the quiet and shy type coming off as someone with such determination. Some honestly couldn't help but feel inspired, while the other half remained skeptical. As for Bakugo, well, it looked he was about to destroy 2 buildings. Everyone was startled when the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. As everyone made their way out, without even looking, Midoriya noticed Bakugo coming his way. From what he can tell, it obviously wasn't for a friendly chat. Not wasting any time, Midoriya summoned a bone outside the classroom window. With a subtle flick of his finger, the bone collided with the window, making a loud tapping sound. With Bakugo and his cronies distracted, he used his teleportation ability, while making sure nobody was watching him. Midoriya ended up at an area of the school where he detected no one to see him appear. Without delay, he hastily made his way to the entrance to escape the potentially livid Bakugo. As he made it out, he could hear the sounds of Bakugo making explosions and cursing at the top of his lungs. It made Izuku chuckle a bit as he made his way home. "Get dumped on," he mentally said with a grin as he continued his route home. He reached a tunnel that would allow him to reach home faster. Suddenly his senses came to life, and he found himself quickly teleporting behind whatever tried to sneak up on him. To his surprise, it appeared to be a villain completely made out of sludge. "You're pretty fast, kid. I don't know how you ended up behind me, but I won't let you get out of my sight this time. With your ability, I could easily get away from him," he added with a bit of anger. He then chuckled evilly as he prepared himself to capture this seemingly easy catch. And with that, he lunged forward to capture Izuku, who snapped out of his shock to go on the offensive. In his mind, incapacitate or drive away were his objectives as the sludge man attacked. He immediately formed a barrier of bones surrounding the villain, momentarily halting him as he didn't expect bones to just sprout of nowhere. With this distraction, Izuku immediately teleported above the sludge villain behind his back. Keeping up the pace, he immediately formed a bone club charged with energy and proceeded to bring it down on the villain, who became dazed from the unexpected attack. While stunned, Izuku formed 2 medium-sized Gaster blasters and proceeded to unleash powerful beams at the villain, completely dispersing him and effectively putting the villain out of commission. After breathing a sigh of relief, he then proceeded to make all the bones disappear, leaving holes on the ground where the bone fence was last placed. Looking around, he spotted a bottle and proceeded to levitate the villain's pieces into it. Once completed, he sealed the bottle and decided to wait for a bit. He figured that a hero must have been chasing him. Shortly after, Izuku was slumped down at the tunnel taking a nap when suddenly a large vibration woke him up. Not sure who it was, he prepared to fight. His eyes widened when he saw it wasn't a villain that arrived. Quite the opposite actually, the one who arrived was none other than All Might. Izuku practically screamed. All Might arrived at the scene with a sign of confusion at his face. Strange, I could have sworn he ended up here. He began looking around cautiously when suddenly a young boy wearing a green hoodie gawking at him caught his attention. Timidly, Izuku approached All Might, presenting the bottle to him. He was about to say something when All Might interrupted him. My thanks, young man, but I couldn't possibly take a break. A villain made it through here, so I advise you to head home now. He was about to jump away until Izuku got his attention. Actually, sir, this bottle is the villain. All Might looked at him curiously, but was amused by when he was addressed as sir. Seeing his confusion, he clarified, what I meant to say is that I managed to beat the villain and secure him in this bottle. I waited here to see who the hero was and then hand over the villain to them, he said, sheepishly, having a hard time containing himself since his idol was right in front of him. Just calm down, this is no time for fanboying, he thought to himself. All Might was definitely taken back by the fact that a young boy was able to defeat a villain and manage to contain him no less. He wanted to speak more, but his time was running out, so he graciously accepted the bottle. After giving his thanks, he jumped to a nearby building, leaving a speechless Izuku behind. I can't believe I just met All Might and managed to help him as well. This has got to be one of the best days ever, he screamed into his mind with glee. He practically started to walk home with a skip in his step, but he stopped mid-step when he noticed something was wrong with All Might. He seemed to be in a bit of a hurry, he said quietly with a thinking gesture. Not wasting any time, he decided to track down where All Might was landing to and decided to follow him and see what's wrong. I know it's none of my business, but a hero needs to keep an eye out for others who may need help. With that, he teleported where All Might could possibly be. Roof of a random building. As he appeared on the roof of a building, he began looking around for any sign of him. He was about to leave when he suddenly heard someone coughing. Turning around, he saw a skinny man with blonde hair. But that wasn't the most shocking part, but rather what the man was wearing. His clothes were eerily similar to the ones that All Might wore. They stared at each other for what felt like hours when Izuku decided to break the silence. Hesitantly, he said, All Might? The man had wide eyes, obviously not expecting someone to recognize him. With a tired sigh, he said, Yep, it's me. The man expected Izuku to freak out, or at least be skeptical. But Izuku did something that took the pro hero by surprise. He began looking around, making sure no one was around, even using his sensory field just to be safe. Once he was sure the coast is clear, he turned to All Might and gave him a gentle smile and said, I assume there is an explanation to all of this. He received a nod as a response. All right, you can choose whether to tell me or not. If you don't want to, then it's fine. You have my word, though, that I'll keep your secret to my grave. I swear on my bones. Just keep in mind that no matter what happens, you will always be a hero in my eyes, and I'm sure others would say the same, he finished with an understanding look on his face. All Might for once in his life didn't know what to say. He felt touched at the care expressed from the young boy before him, and was honestly shocked that he would be willing to keep his secret whether he revealed the truth or not. Looking into the young boy's eyes, he could see understanding and care. But another aspect that the boy showed was trust. With a smile he gestured the two take a seat, and allowed himself to explain his situation. By the end of it, Izuku could only stare with wide eyes. The symbol of peace has a severe injury, and he can't maintain his form for too long. I am aware that what I'm saying is hard to believe, but that is the truth. I continue to fight crime, because I cannot let the symbol of peace be daunted by evil. As a hero, a hero must be willing to risk their life, he said in a serious tone that made Izuku shiver a bit. He could practically feel the weight carried on those words. Now that he thought about it, it did explain why there was a limited amount of appearances coming from the pro in the past few years. To continue your duty with that injury, it struck just how willing he was to risk everything to save others. What is your name, young man? All Might asked. Izuku turned to All Might, who was giving him a kind smile. A gesture he gladly returned. It's Izuku Midoriya, sir, he offered a handshake. All Might smiled and gladly shook Izuku's hand. Well, it's been nice me dash. He was interrupted when both felt ground shake from an explosion not too far from them. All Might was about to rush down the stairs when he was stopped by Izuku. He was about to say something when he suddenly found themselves in a secluded area nearby the chaos. All Might wanted to know how he did this, but he shook off his curiosity and decided to focus on the task at hand. Separating from All Might, Izuku began going through the crowd. Once he made it to the front of the crowd, his feeling of dread intensified as he saw a familiar blonde head of hair surrounded by a mass of sludge. Kaken! He screamed in worry. He must have escaped when All Might was in a hurry earlier. He made his way to the front of the crowd. He couldn't help but hear their conversations. I wonder why All Might isn't here. Doesn't he realize someone needs him? Izuku resisted the urge to confront them and instead focused on the situation. It's clear that the sludge needs a few moments before he can completely take over Bakugo's body. With that in mind, it was clear that there is only one thing left to do. Rushing through the crowd as he formed a bone staff. His body went on overdrive as he made his way to the villain. The cries of the crowd and heroes becoming distant. However, it did catch the villain's attention. BNHAOST, you say run plays. You. I'll kill you. The villain screamed out before he shot sludge towards Izuku, who teleported above to avoid the shot. Izuku then threw his weapon directly at the eye of the villain. After hitting its mark, the villain screamed and loosened his grip on Bakugo for a few seconds, allowing him to breathe. Kaken. Izuku then teleported in front of his childhood friend turned bully, who was stunned by what Izuku just did. Not wasting any time, he gripped Bakugo with his psychokinesis and flung him towards the heroes who caught him. Once sure Bakugo was safe, he rushed towards in front of them, standing between them and the villain, who finished recovering and began glaring at Izuku. Damn brat. I won't let you beat me this time. The villain roared as he began growing in size. This time? Everyone but All Might thought, who was still trying to process what he is seeing. Deku, the hell you are helping me for, roared Bakugo as he got up and yanked himself from the pro's grip. While keeping his eyes on the villain with hands in his pockets, he said, I know we don't see eye to eye, but I won't just stand there let someone get hurt. He then turned around and gave a grin, and to be honest, it looked like your eyes were calling for help. The pros and civilians who heard couldn't help but be taken back by what the young man just said. As for All Might, well, All Might was shaking, not from anger but with excitement. Those words. He thought, he felt a chill down his spine as the boy's words struck a chord within him. It's as if his predecessor had just smacked him with all her might. He couldn't help but grin as the young man summoned two medium-sized blasters, surprising everyone else. This again, you bastard? Villain asked in surprise as he stared at the two blasters. Though this moment of surprise will only serve as the villain's downfall. Izuku's eyes lit up as he took aim. Yep, he said with a grin as the blasters began charging. The massive villain then charged towards Izuku, but it was too late. With a thrust of his hands, the blasters unleashed hell. ZWOOSSHH. The beams made contact and effectively dispersed the villain, rendering him unconscious. Once sure that the villain was beaten, Izuku fell on all fours before passing out from exhaustion. The pros snapped out of their shock and began helping Izuku, while others helped Bakugo, who was still shocked by what he witnessed. Song stops. As the pros took care of both students, the crowd began cheering for the heroes. All Might stood in the back, his body shaking in excitement, and happiness apparent on his face as he stared at the unconscious form of Izuku. I found him. I finally found my successor. After the fight. As Izuku walked home after being given the all-clear by the medics, he couldn't help but feel happy even if he passed out from exhaustion. He can remember the heroes scolding him for his reckless behavior, but also told him that he had a mark of a true hero. Bakugo confronted him about his powers, stating that he didn't need help, and that his quirk was nothing compared to his. Izuku groaned to himself, I swear, that guy's an even bigger bonehead than me. He then began chuckling at his own joke. He was interrupted when he heard someone else laughing, clearly enjoying his joke. Looking forward, he was greeted by none other than All Might. I thought you would be dealing with the press? That's not a problem, why? The hero began flexing, well that's because I'm All Me BLARGH. He changed to his normal form mid-flex, coughing up blood, surprising Izuku. Kid, I just wanted to say thank you, wanted to give you an offer. He wiped the blood off his mouth. An offer from the symbol of peace? This needs to be private, Izuku thought. Excuse me, gaining the hero's attention, I believe this should be discussed somewhere more secure. Doing this in public can prove to be risky, he stated, making the pro think. You have point and you're right, this is an important offer. Before he could suggest a place, Izuku held out his hand. I believe I can help, he said with a smile. With that, All Might grabbed his hand and was instantly brought to a secluded area. Looking around, All Might couldn't help himself and say incredible, earning a slight blush from the young hero. Once settled, All Might began, now, I saw you run head first into danger, while I just stood there among the crowd watching it all. Even the other pro heroes stood still as you, young Midoriya, faced the villain, risking your life for another despite having personal issues with each other. As he said this, Izuku couldn't help but start tearing up at what his idol is saying. They say the best heroes have one thing in common, their bodies moved on their own, without a moment of hesitation, All Might said with a proud voice. He then pointed to Izuku, you, young Midoriya, are no exception to this. I can say without a doubt that you will be great hero, All Might finished, making Izuku's tears flow freely. That is why you will inherit my power, All Might added suddenly. With that, Izuku broke from his trance and stared at his idol, clearly confused. What?